This lesson is on the legacy fluid and fog effects that are part of Maya. A more advanced system would be going to the Bifrost system, but for those of you that don't have a heavy-duty GPU or CPU system, you might want to stick with these legacy effects. And I think they're just a little easier to get your head around the first time and then move on to Bifrost from there. But we're going to start off, and it's going to give you a lot of abilities. I like its ability to make fog, but you can also make sort of like a rudimentary liquid system like I have here, and I'm even going to show you how to sort of make your own workaround for sort of a emit from object. Like it seems like I have this cylinder as a pipe that is creating this liquid that it is then filling this space. And we'll also talk about how you could make this work with a landscape versus just inside of this kind of containment space that the liquid and fog system works within. All right, let's stop, and I'm going to show you how I created this. All right, so new scene. Alright, so first thing we're going to want to do is change from the modeling mode to effects, just so we can get the fluids folder to come up. You'll see here's those Bifrost fluids I was talking about, and they're amazing. Like that really is the best kind of like liquid simulation system, and fog and all sorts of different effects that you can do, but it does take a lot more processing and GPU power, so your CPU and GPU better be within the standards for Maya. So, but these ones do take a little bit of power as well, but are a little bit more manageable than Bifrost to get started with. All right, right off the bat, I'm going to go ahead and click on fluids, and I'm just going to say create a 3D container. Now, this container you're seeing here, this is a fluid container. That basically, it kind of like limits where the fluids can happen. So if I unfolded the fluid here in my outliner, you'll see there's a fluid emitter, and the whole fluid cage, there's like the fluids can't happen outside this cage. So if you create like a big landscape, you can still have it all in your landscape. All you got to do is scale this cage up. There's no limit on how big I can make this cage. I can make it happen anywhere in my scene. I at least move it up so that the ground plane in here works in the ground plane there. And you can add colliders and stuff, so you could make a landscape that collides with the liquids or the fog that you're creating, and we'll talk about that here in just a second. So there's my emitter. If I just go by default right now and go ahead and hit play, I am in classic workspace mode just so I have access to my timeline. And you'll see there it goes. I'm getting this nifty little emitter. It doesn't get very far though, so I'm going to go ahead and add about 1,000 frames to my timeline. There we go. I did that right down here. Now you can actually see the emitter filling up the top there with the fog, and you get this really nice fog starting to come down on the emitter, right? And I can move that emitter downward. I can make it come from the bottom. It won't work outside the 3D box container like I said, but I could move it down to the bottom and then hit play again, and now it's going to come up and start to move, right? Alright, so one of the big things you need to look at is kind of the fluid itself here, and we're going to look at the fluid shape is what we want to look at first. So let me stop on that just so I can get stop. There we go. Alright, now that I've got that, you can't always access everything in the attribute while you have play going, so you got to stop. As soon as I did that and I clicked on fluid, now you'll see I have fluid 1 and fluid shape. So one of the things I like to do is I think you get a better resolution out of it. You can increase resolution right here on the X, Y, and Z. So I could like up these to like 40 by 40 by 40, and I'm going to get a higher quality fog. You're going to see it slows down considerably though, because it takes more processing power the higher the resolution. But I'm getting like a softer, more kind of detailed fog that really rolls out and has these like nice little ripple effects that are going on, and you'll notice that particularly when you go to render it, right? But you can also say keep voxels square. So voxels are the name of what's kind of creating these dynamic fog systems, the individual units, and so keep the voxels square. Then I can work with a base resolution, and this kind of controls all of it there, and back that up and hit play on it. Again, it does slow it down the higher the resolution, but I think it gives it a little better quality there as how that fog and steam is kind of distributing and whatnot. Now I can play with the viscosity. I can make it like way slower and thicker. You can see it's like slowly building now, and it's a little thicker and not quite that like tube of fog. It's got kind of like a more of a mass to it as it comes up. It's kind of steaming off on both sides. I'll bring the viscosity back down. You've got friction, you've got dampness. There's all sorts of different fun stuff that you can kind of play around with. One of the key ones though is gravity. So like say I don't want it to go up in the air. What if I just want to fill the ground with like a little pond fog, kind of spooky vibe? Well, I could actually give gravity a negative value. I could say like -5 and then back it up. And now it's going to just stay down by the ground. It's actually just going to fill this whole chamber up. I'll bring the base resolution down a little bit just to speed this up. Start it over here. There we go. And now I'm getting this really nice ground cover that's just kind of going to like fill my whole environment and scene, right? And let's bring the dampness back down. Let's see if that helps it spread out a little bit. There we go. Now I'm really like filling the scene up nicely with my fog, right? And it's going to go up the sides of it and all that fun stuff. So keep in mind that ability to keep things low is using that gravity feature and giving it a negative value instead of that. Now, you might ask, how do I make it collide with something, right? So I could now bring my emitter up in the air, like right now it's done on the ground. And since I've given the gravity a negative value, now it's going to like the fog's going to like drop down and kind of fill the space, right? Well, that's kind of fun. Now, I did bring its value way down, so let's go back on here. Let's at least bring the base resolution up to like 25. Now I'm going to bring in an object. I'm going to just create, let's create a sphere. Scale it up a little bit. I'm just going to put it right in the path of where that fog is dropping. And I'm going to choose the fluid object, and I'm going to hold down Command and choose the sphere. And then I'm going to go to Fluids, and I'm going to go to Make Collide. Now, you'll see what happens. Now it's kind of spreading out around that cylinder, going around the edge of it, and then dropping down the rest of the way, right? So that cylinder has become a collider object that the fog has to move around, which is pretty fun. All right, let me stop that and go back to the fluid. I'll bring the resolution up to 30, and yeah. So next I'm going to show you how to kind of switch it from looking like, there is this thing called liquids, which is enable liquid simulation, but when you do that, it doesn't really like do a whole lot. I mean, a little bit. You've got some like gravity and liquid mist and things like that. Like that's definitely actually coming off a little bit more like a rain mist in a way instead of like a full-on liquid. So you can play around with that and play with the density. I'm getting kind of like raindrops almost in a way, and I could give it a density here and get sort of like a, like I said, there's liquid and air, and then there's this density based. It does okay. It's not bad. You can definitely get some interesting effects out of it. Like a dribbling rain of some sort. Definitely, especially if I put a, play around with some of the color and the texture and everything like that. Speaking of which, if you come down here below under shading, sorry, I'll fold this all up because this is what it's going to look like when you find it. So under shading here, and I come down here, I can choose color. I could give it like a blue tint to it there, which is cool. And I could, bring the transparency up so it's not so transparent. I could make it rather opaque. There we go. And again, I could come up and increase that voxel density. If I take the square off, we'll leave that back where it is. Let's see. I could give it a little more viscosity, a little thickness to it. Let's back it up and start over. There we go. So, the liquid simulation is fun. You can definitely play around with it. Try to bring some of these values down a little bit. There we go. Getting a bit, kind of a little waterfall mist vibe to it, whatever. You can play around with it. But I'm going to turn liquid simulation off. And I want to show you under down here just a little bit. So if we go down a little bit and go to fluid shape, we're on fluid shape, and dynamic simulation, We've done the gravity and everything like that. Now I want to show you under surface. So right here, above where the shading was, you can go from a volume render, which is this right now, to a surface render. And here comes that liquid. It's going to pull up in the bottom and start to fill it. So just so you can kind of see what that surface render looks like versus the volume render. And again, you know, I can come into my shading. I could change its color to make it look a little more like water. A little bit. There we go. Nothing too crazy. And you know, I could bring the transparency up or down on that, make it really opaque or whatever I want to add to it. And there is like a shading quality you can play around with as well in the rendering. But yeah, you get a really nice effect here, and a fun liquid effect. And like I said, this will also work with a collider, which is fun. So if I want to, I could go ahead and create an object real quick, something to catch this. So I'm going to go ahead and make like a little quick bathtub. So let's scale this down a little bit, make it a little wider. There we go. I'm going to give it an extrude, inner extrude, and then extrude again, and go down. Okay. And let's just make this overall a little bit of a deeper object. There we go. All right. And I'm going to drop this down to the bottom of my scene. That'll do it. And let's just take this whole thing up just so we don't have to see that ground plane anymore. Bring it up to the ground plane. All right, cool. Now, as I said before, you can take your cube and your fluid system and go to fluid and say make collide. And now this should fill the tub. And it's going to fill the boundaries of it pretty well there. So whether I'm making a bathtub or I have kind of a landscape where I've created kind of like a pond-like feature, I could really fill any surface. I mean, the viscosity is a little thick here. It's really splashing up around the edges. So I might want to play around with that gravity again. The gravity might be so intense, which is making it kind of like peak up in the corners. But, you know, I could freeze this wherever I want, which is really good. And I believe there is a way under convert here that I could take an instance to an object. Fluid to polygons, I believe. There we go. And so that allows me to make a polygonal object surface that then I can have frozen and I don't have to play with anymore inside of the dynamic system. So under modify again, that was under fluid to polygon. Not a lot of options, unfortunately, of that. It did triangulate it quite a bit, but then I could go and quadrangulate that. I could come back up here to modeling and mesh and quadrangulate that quite a bit and try to get that back into quads so that I don't have such a messy mesh to work with. So bring that back. Last trick I'm going to show you with the fluid emitter is, even though they don't really have with the legacy system like an emit from object feature, what I had at the beginning when I showed you kind of like how I had created this, and back this up, I created just a quick cylinder, like a kind of like a pipe that it was going to come out of. And let me scale this in length a little bit and bring it up. And I just selected the bottom of it. I did another little extrusion on it basically. So Command E, go to my scale tool, do an inner extrude, and then Command E again, and just kind of extrude it up into it. Now you can see I have kind of like a hollow pipe form. And then I selected my fluid and the cylinder, and I went to, let me go back to FX, go to Fluids, and make collide. And then I took my emitter, the emitter object itself, and I want to make sure it's already up in there. You can kind of see it's inside the pipe right now. And now, when I emit, it does kind of like build up on the surface a little bit. It doesn't quite just contain it on the inside. It gets like a little bit on the exterior, but it does make it look like it's actually like flowing out of the pipe. So I still don't know why. There might be a little bit that I have to work on like the scale of it, but it does. It's almost like water's kind of like a little bit of like evaporate on the outside, or is just kind of like wet on the outside of the pipe, but the rest of it really looks like it's kind of like pouring out of the pipe. And I've had that happen whether it's vertical or horizontal. So you can kind of give it a source that it's coming out of that way. Again, kind of just being a little bit creative with the colliders. And you can have it collide with multiple objects. I could have it still colliding with a landscape down below. I would just select them both and add them to the fluid and have them collide. But yeah, so just kind of a quick workaround for having it simulated like it's emitting from an object. All right, future lesson will be on Bifrost, but you can still have a lot of fun with this one with a lot less GPU and CPU power. So play around with your legacy fluids and fog effects, and thanks for tuning in.